Ngibingelele Ndlemnyama, ngibingelele Mbogoto. Greetings to all the viewers of Tintswalo's Perspective. I am Sthembiso Dabula Mabuja. I am the founder of an organization called She Leads, which focuses on women empowerment. So today I'll be facilitating a conversation, and it is basically themed empowerment beyond the surface. And today we are joined by women who breathe, walk, and live women empowerment. And I have been privileged to have seen some of the initiatives that they've started and that they continue to do to make sure that women are empowered. So in today's discussion, the main focus is basically women empowerment in a transformative way. Dinewa Gola in her book says that the women empowerment talks that we currently have are not really transformative in action. When we look at in our own private spaces, the empowerment that we speak about compared to the empowerment we speak about in public is not really reflective of the daily realities that women face on their everyday lives. So today we will be tackling that, and we have more objectives that we would like to achieve after this conversation. So I'm going to introduce my speakers. The first one is Karabo Mohale. She's the Deputy Chairperson of the NYDA. She has many more caps that she wears, but for the sake of this conversation, we are going to refer to her as the Deputy Chairperson of the NYDA. And we are also joined by Comrade Precious. She's one of the founders of Young Women in Africa. She also wears many caps, but for the sake of today's conversation, that's the title we're going to go about. You are greeted. Welcome to Tintswalo's Perspective. Yeah, you can greet our viewers before we start.
Hello, everybody. Everybody. Thank you, host of tonight.
Good evening, everyone. To all the viewers.
It's beautiful to have you.
Also, there must be a disclaimer, yes, because Precious and I are like friends. So it was not a plot for us to take over the last episode. So please, you must defend us.
No, I'll definitely do. I will defend you. And it's actually quite symbolic that you guys are part of this podcast. They're saying it's a bonus podcast, but it's imperative for women empowerment discussions to go beyond the month of August. The month of August is dedicated for celebrating women, but I think that for us to transform and to make sure that women are always accommodated in their everyday lives, these type of discussions need to go beyond August. So having people who walk, speak, and breathe women empowerment, it's such an honor. It's really an honor. So I'm going to share today's objectives before we start the conversation, right? And how I'm going to lead it is that we are then going to define what this empowerment is. For an ordinary woman walking in the streets of Alexandra, reflecting on women empowerment, what would that mean to her? So today's objectives basically is to discuss the underlaying, to uncover the deeper meaning of what women empowerment is and often the overlooked aspects of that. And another objective is to make sure that we rethink what true empowerment looks like. Dinewa Gola again in her book says that legislatively, women are empowered in South Africa, but they feel unsafe walking in the streets. How does that look like? You know, what is this woman empowerment that we often speak about? Another objective for today's discussion, we need to highlight and make the listeners rethink the importance of addressing systematic barriers and fostering genuine transformation. We are then going to narrow it down to finance women inclusion in finance, women in trade in Africa, and we also need to inspire and motivate the listeners to take part in the deeper and more meaningful work of women empowerment. So I'd like for us to tackle what women empowerment is, for us to go deep before we go high. What is women empowerment? What do you understand it to be? I'm going to start with you, Comrade Karabo, before I go to Comrade Precious.
Thank you so much for having us on this bonus episode. And I think, as you would have mentioned, we've walked a very long journey of trying to not only talk the talk, but walk the talk in as so far as ensuring that our immediate spaces, whether in the workplace, whether in political spaces, whether even at home, reflect our ideals and aspirations as young women. A world that sees women as worthy of being included in all walks of life, being captains of industry. But I think when I reflect about what women empowerment means to me, I always reflect on what I learned when I was doing my first master's at the University of Sussex, when I had to write an article about how education in South Africa was actually used as a tool to continue the oppression of the people of South Africa, but also to continue to entrench patriarchy in our societies. And one of the areas that I discovered, which I never knew, and I mean, as an activist, there are many things that we do not know, but we get to appreciate as and when we read and as and when we interact with other like-minded progressives. It's about how patriarchy in South Africa was actually legalized and it was institutionalized. Because when you look at, previous acts of apartheid, you look at how women were treated as perpetual minors, meaning that whether you are 70 years old, whether you are 60 years old, you had no right of self-determination. You had no autonomy over your brain, your thinking faculties, over your own body. You consistently needed a male's approval in order for you to do certain things. So if you wanted to go to school as a woman, you needed a man's permission. Whether that man was your father, your brother, even in some cases your son, you actually always needed that type of permission to exist in society. If you were fortunate enough to get a job, you were not even allowed to open a bank account. Your salary was paid towards whoever the male, guardian would be in that sense. So you look at the journey that women have traversed in as far as fighting for their own right to self-determination. And we may underestimate the power of that, but we look back at the type of patriarchal anomalies that we're fighting in society today, and you look back and you say, actually, this was a way of life. It was a legalized way of life. So men were given the power over women. If you were in the workplace, you were raped, you couldn't report the case. Actually, the Minister of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability, when she reflects on this, says Black women were told that it was a privilege that you have a white man who has actually even touched you, let alone penetrated you. And you look at those dire, dehumanizing, situations and way of life that women had to actually be subjected to. And when you look at the journey that we've all traveled today as women, as a collective, you then realize that there's some progress that we have done. But of course, we always reflect that every step means that we must consistently look back and say, where have we traveled? How far do we still need to go? And I think for me, when I think about empowerment, I actually look at the journey that women have traveled and say, we have made substantial progress in South Africa to fight for the rights of women, to fight for women's place in society, not only in society, but in the boardroom, in political structures, in economic structures, in boardrooms, in various spaces. We have actually waged a relentless war against the dehumanization of women in South Africa. But of course, going forward, there's definitely more that needs to be done. And I think that's where the conversation going forward is going to be around what do we mean when we say more needs to be done? How do we envision the inclusion of women in South Africa? How do we envision the inclusion of women in the future of work, in the future of trade, in the future of financial transformation? What does that look like? How do we locate women, and where do we locate women in that sense? Thank you.
You laid the foundation by providing the history of where women come from, especially in South Africa and where we are now. I'm going to come to you, Comrade Precious. What is empowerment to you?
The detailed and extensive definition that Karabo has given. Mine, and which is usually my favorite of defining women empowerment, has always been it's defined in several ways, first and foremost, but it has always been to say it is, in fact, to promote the ability for women to determine their choices. So the agency of women, for them to choose for themselves what they want, where and how, is for me what empowerment is. And once systems are put in place that allows them to do so, that is women empowerment for me, in short.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Then I'd like for us to explore what are some of the misconceptions that need to be challenged about women empowerment that you often hear about. I'll start with you, Comrade Precious.
That those who advocate for women empowerment are mostly single and bitter and bitter and heartbroken and losers. At some point, there was that thing that would go around. I think those are in our primitive stages as activists in the student movement. There was a misconception, that if you are a gender activist, you are probably lesbian. So those are a lot of the misconceptions. We actually want to introduce, that has been said by even people that we took very serious until they said that we want to replace patriarchy with matriarchy. I don't know what's matriarchy as it relates to patriarchy, but those things will be many of the things that will be said, that no, we're trying to build matriarchy and whatever that is. So those are some of the misconceptions that would be firmly be posed in the space.
So how do we address those? Do we tell them that people who are for women empowerment are not single? They are married, they are not lesbian. What do we say? How do we address it?
I thought Karabo is taking it. Are you not taking it, Karabo? You have muted.
I was saying the question is posed to you, who say we are single because we want to.
No, like, look, we're challenging societal constructs and stereotypes about how to build a progressive society, and how to ensure that we live in a society where people are all equal, where diversity is embraced. So it has nothing to do with the raw characterization about the agents that push for such empowerment. And so it must not have anything to do with the sexuality of those that stand as champions of women empowerment. It must not have anything to do with the relations that they are involved in personally or in whatever space. And it is a weapon of patriarchy also to want to discredit the voices that advance such messaging. So the voices must be discredited, and such loose and baseless things are said about the activists. So it's about just refocusing the conversation and ensuring that we do not agree to the defacing of the activists in the space in an attempt to want to discredit the messaging.
I agree. I fully agree. Those are really differing comments. They're trying to not center where the conversation must really go. For you, Comrade Karabo, what initiatives, what women empowerment initiatives should we look at to address the deeper structural issues rather than just the symptoms of what we face on a daily?
I think I first want to just latch on to what Precious was speaking about the work that is done literally by patriarchy to try and dissuade women from assuming their rightful role in the echelons of society, in the echelons of the economy. And of course, this is done by, this propaganda that she speaks about. And more often than not, as women, when we go into these spaces where we need to assume certain roles that require us to be in the forefront, we're often challenged by the household dynamics, that have, for the longest of time, socialized us to think and act in a particular way. And that's why most probably men would want to think that, if you want to be a leader, it means that in the household you are single, you don't have a man. And that's why you want to be this dominant figure in different spaces. And I suppose it's an ill way of looking at women in society, a very aggressive way that actually wants to continuously suppress women and subjugate them to the dominion of men. And I suppose it's a challenge that as and when we speak about women empowerment and we reflect on the journey that women have traversed, is really what role do we as women, start playing in trying to, re-socialize society around how they see the role of women, especially when you look at the household dynamics. Because when you are in the household, even if you are married, you see something as simple as a woman earning more than the husband. It becomes a point of contention in the family. It also becomes a point of contention in society, because what society knows that the woman is the CEO and the husband is just a mere teacher, that is used as a means to ridicule and emasculate a man, to say, you don't even wear the pants in your own family. So what are you going to tell us in society? You're not a man, because accordingly, society would think that being a man means that you must assume certain roles, economically, politically, socially, and in other spheres. But what can we do? I mean, the question that you would have been posing to me is, what is it that we can be able to do to ensure that we put tangible efforts in place to realize the empowerment that we so much speak about? And I think one of the most critical areas that, beyond the question of home dynamics or household dynamics on our socialization, is really to speak about the financial empowerment of women. There was a saying that I saw on Facebook. I really cannot remember the exact words or the semantics that were used, but the author said that, money as a means of, getting you whatever latitude it is or freedom in your life, assists you, not to be stuck in situations where you would not ordinarily need to be stuck in. So, and I think, Comrade Precious, you'd remember Madam Edith Banda, who is former President Joyce Banda's daughter, said this when we're at the Women's Convention in Zimbabwe, that you need money in order for you to survive. Financial empowerment actually empowers women to be able to have agency over their lives, to be able to take certain decisions pertaining their own lives. Sometimes we're stuck in situations because we do not have the financial freedom to be able to take the decisions that we want to take. Unemployment makes you to be stuck, whether it is in a relationship, whether it is in a household setting, because you might not be able to afford to cater for yourself and your own children. And I think one of the critical anchors of empowerment holistically is the financial freedom of women, so that you are able to take decision as a fully conscious human being without there being socio-economic conditions that actually, disrupt that decision making process. We always say that there's nothing as disruptive, as dehumanizing as poverty, because you end up, doing things that you would not ordinarily want to do had you had the money to be able to exercise your agency in a different way. So it is important that when we think about the empowerment of women, we encourage about that around the financial independence of women. How do we ensure that we build this microcosm of society that is financially independent and therefore can be able to exercise dominion over their own bodies, dominion over their own thinking capacities, and take decisions not based on the fact that I am hungry today and if I leave this household, I'm going to be hungry tomorrow, but because if I stay in this situation, it's a situation that I want to stay in, and I am not forced to stay in it because I do not have any other choice. But also, how do we then also reimagine, intensifying the rights of women in the workspace? We've been challenging ourselves to think about how, when we go into the workspace as young women, as older women, we're often forced to choose, right? You are choosing between three things. It's either you want to have a career, you want to be a mother, or you want to be a wife. When you are lucky, you can be a wife and a mother, or even if you are luckier, you are God's favorite child in society. Then you have all three. You are a career woman, you are a mother, you are a wife. Such things in society need to be rapidly transformed, right? We need to be able to create conducive spaces for women to be able to exercise their choices to become mothers and wives. And that must not come with an unintended consequence of a particular human being being not considered for certain promotions in the workplace. You could be working so hard, in the NYDA, for example, doing your best. And the minute you become pregnant, all your dreams have been shattered, because now we're starting to think, hey, tomorrow you're going to be telling us that your nanny did not come to work and therefore you must stay at home. We are having a physical meeting. You want to join in virtually because your child is sick. And all of those things they are societal anomalies, right? Being a mother should not be frowned upon. Being a parent should not be seen as something that is a disadvantage to women. Actually, we have a moral obligation of transforming society so that it enables women to effectively participate in all sectors of the economy. If it means having a daycare facility at your workplace, so be it. If it means that you are able to assist women to have a nursery room, when they are lactating, they're able to ensure that, they pump milk and then they go back to work. Let us transform the workplace so that it envisions and carries our ideals and aspirations of creating this inclusivity that we so wish to have in our lifetime. Thank you.
Sure, that's a
Stacey,
mouthful.
before you come in, when she was speaking, I remembered with a very question you posed first of around the examples, the notion of a good and bad women or good and bad girls, that there's been a structured way by, like patriarchy, where some women are good women and others are bad. The bad women are those who are outspoken, who stand their ground, who know what they want and they go for it. The good women are those that are meek, they submit, succumb, and they accept everything that comes their way. During graduation season, it's a continuous thing. You must observe it. When there are women who graduate as doctors, then there'll be this photo trending because this woman in red gown went to kneel before her husband in the red gown. Now, it's a choice to do that. But society then says that, look, she can be this educated, but this woman is still submitting to this man. So gender relations are indeed power relations, and in whichever form that women try to improve themselves and to contend, there are always narratives, notions that are deliberately reproduced to want to sustain and normalize ways in which women continuously live within the confines that have been defined for them by societal norms that are patriarchal.
Sure. No, I completely agree. I completely agree with the both of you. I'm actually reminded of a quote I came across that said, if you want to know who owns the power in a society, you need to look at who owns the shame. So each time, what capitalism does is that when you're unemployed, it makes you feel bad. People can't even think of becoming entrepreneurs because it's shunned upon. You might not make it, you might not what, but that's basically robbing you of the ability to decide and want to become your own boss. So the same applies in a patriarchal society where they will shame you for being a progressive woman, so that they show that they have power over you and they can control you at any point. Moving from what Karabo is saying about empowering women in the workplace, making sure that we create opportunities for women in the workspace, how do we also ensure the same inclusion of someone from Diepsloot who might not have a degree, who might not have work, who might be basically a GBV victim, but who needs to be empowered, who must also have the financial muscle to survive and move out of a situation that's compromising, such as gender-based violence? How do we empower that particular woman, Comrade Precious?
You know, part of the things that we have been talking about is access to information, access to the already existing opportunities and services.
Mm-hmm.
This means whatever form of information that any woman, whether in a township or in the villages, need, or anywhere in the periphery, must have access to this information on how to go about processes of improving themselves, their lives, and their families. Then access to opportunities, the existing opportunities, always end up with people that are some sort of elite, are in the cities, in uh, kind of urban townships and so on, and not to those that need them the most. It's because of the way in which we disseminate the very information. So we need to make our services accessible to the people. The financial, I want to speak about how when we speak of the financial markets or system or industry, it's at different layers where they participate at the lowest of them all, mostly both as those who are on the productive level and also as consumers. But there are those who are on the top, who are running big industries, who are controlling the financial markets and so on. But how do we ensure that these participants at the lower level, who are mostly productive forces, participate and build power to reach the very levels that we want them to go to? I'm passionate about the stokvels,
Sure.
which are a multi-million industry on their own. They're an industry on their own. In each and every village where you go, in the townships or everywhere, women have organized and mobilized and coordinated themselves into different forms of stokvels. And in those stokvels, there's consistency, there's discipline, and there's even financial literacy on how they manage them, sustain them to ensure that there is some profitability for all of them as that community that are involved. But what has happened with time, when they get accustomed to ensuring that because of crime or whatever reason, these monies collected in stokvel at whatever level are served now with the banks for interest. These banks that are collecting stokvel money and charging banking fees and so on, are making a lot of money out of our ordinary women. That if you can one day imagine a women bank where we actually encourage women to all bank their multi-million Stockwell money, that money can do a lot for women.
Sure.
So we professionalize the Stockwells, and we make it, we factor it into the financial systems and professionalize them as financial institutions, but that are affordable, that are women oriented and sympathetic to the plight of women, because this is actually the money of women. So that's one of the ways that we can reach down to them. But there's been also the issue of cooperatives, and there's been an attempt to also want to define Stokvels as some sort of cooperative. Now, the cooperatives, whether it's for food or whatever services that are there, we have to encourage our people to continue grouping them together to form cooperatives, because it's better than businesses run by individuals where individuals profit alone, but whether through providing or getting services from government institutions. So if women can group themselves like that, why are women not the ones providing food in schools where their kids are feeding? There is an issue of feeding scheme that is going around. Why are women in that community not grouped in a cooperative, and they're the ones that are supplying the food in the school, but they're also the ones that are cooking? The quality of the food in the school is going to be high because they are cooking for their kids with love, than someone who just pours lots of water and some little in beans, and then these beans, you look at it, you wonder how are the kids eating. But if the mother cooks the food for these children, they are going to cook from the heart and with care and love. And those are just part of the minimal ways we can empower them on the ground. But also the other thing is that we have to consider in the community, in densely populated areas where there are no spaces or lands for gardens, just subsistently and survivalist gardening for them. What can we introduce them to? Are they going to be sowing so that they sell? All those minimal businesses or mechanisms that are put in place, organize them, but also begin to contest spaces for bigger opportunities. That once they're organized like that, they can go to a provincial level, to a district level, nationally, to want to pursue the already existing opportunities that are there. But it starts with, firstly, dissemination and access of information so that they know how to go about whatever it is that they want to do.
Beautiful. You know, the beauty of having women that walk and breathe empowerment is that you've covered what I was about to ask. And that's basically looking at the hidden layers of empowerment. So when speaking about Stokvels, speaking about corporations, you've already covered some of the hidden layers of empowerment, the ones that go unnoticed, you know. So I'm not sure, Comrade Karabo, if there are other ways or other initiatives that go unnoticed that could potentially empower women. We could even focus on inter-country relations to say that looking at empowerment in the financial sector, how do we make sure that women are able to build inter-country relations and trade with one another so that they are fully empowered? Because most people only think that probably trade is only for men or for those who only have access. But how do we empower women in a holistic way?
I think, Comrade Precious actually assisted us in grounding the multiple layers that have to do with empowerment and how actually we need to approach the question of women empowerment. And I suppose sometimes because privilege is blinding, you are really unable to, think about the next person because your lens is, I'm focused on me, how I do my things. And we never really look into what are the fundamental issues that we need to resolve to ensure that we do not leave anyone behind? And I think the South African government, speaks about this consistently. And I think for me, it's actually quite encouraging that part of our slogan is how do we ensure that we do not leave anyone behind? And it's really the lens that Comrade Precious was speaking about the fact that you cannot view women as homogeneous beings. We're all different, right? We come from different backgrounds. We've got different socioeconomic conditions that we are grappling with. And therefore, the question of women empowerment needs to be multi-layered and multi-dimensional. You need to be able to go to women who are in peripheral areas of economic activity and say, what are their immediate challenges that they are facing? How do you ensure that you invest in their local economy so that you can be able to ensure that they become viably active in their immediate environment? And there was a conversation that would have once taken place in South Africa, and I'm not sure how far it ended up. I'm not sure if perhaps it was eventually legislated, and that is how we protect what we consider as infant industries, or industries that actually predominantly exist in either our townships or what we call local economies, those that are in villages and the likes. And you look at how South Africa has been quite lax towards capitalism. Capitalists are having their way in South Africa. You look at we've been having a conversation about revitalizing the local economy, the township economy. You go to a village, villages now, we once had a fight over spaza shops being owned by certain nationalities. Sure. Now spaza shops in our local communities are owned by USAVE, which is ShopRite. ShopRite has taken literally over the spaza shop market. And we're quite silent about it, and we have to be silent about it because far too many times we dance to the tune of capital. And capital always reminds us that, you cannot interfere in markets. You must allow markets to self-determine. I don't want to say nonsense, but you have heard me that markets do not exist to change the material conditions of the people of South Africa. Markets do not exist to contribute to the development trajectory of South Africa. Markets exist so that they can be able to create profits for their shareholders, and that is their main preoccupation. Now, when we speak about how we include women in the different layers, you then go to women who would have been able to break the barrier that exists there in markets, because you've got monopolies, oligopolies that actually hog these markets, and Black people in the main predominantly are unable to penetrate these markets. We're then at a point where we need to challenge government around how to ensure that markets become accessible to these women that we envision that are sitting in peripheral areas of economic activity. How do we ensure that they're able to compete with the USAVE? One day I woke up and I saw that, Dis-Chem was opening salons in townships. I almost laughed. I think there was a conversation about Dis-Chem opening salons, and I said, no, it cannot be. But also I want to say to us as the upcoming generation that when we think about entrepreneurship, when we think about entering into different industries, we should not limit ourselves to service industries. And by service industries, I mean, we must all own car washes. We must all own salons. We must all own brows and shisanyamas. But you cannot be able to access any other platform because you do not have access, whether it's to finance, whether it's to opportunities. Comrade Precious spoke about access to information. How do we ensure that we build conducive communities where young people can be able to innovate? The argument that we posed when we were in the Women's Convention was that you cannot expect women to innovate and ultimately become commercial people and thus commercialize whatever innovation they have when you have not resolved the socioeconomic conditions. Because if I am a mother, I live in a community that is in Hamadipan, for example, where I come from, you don't have access to electricity, you don't have access to uninterrupted running water. your main preoccupation is feeding your children. How do you think that a woman in a village can sit and say, I want to invent a solar-powered phone? That's not their preoccupation. And those are conversations we need to have, that our inability to resolve the questions of poverty, unemployment, and inequality in South Africa have got an adverse impact on the futures, not only of those women, but of their offspring and generations to come. When you speak about a poverty trap, it's the same thing as a wealth trap. If you are born into wealth, I'm telling you, 100 years to come, you're going to be in that wealth. Unless if you squander it, you are really just a nobody, useless person, and you just wairamas and shit. But generally, if you're born into wealth, you're going to be trapped in that wealth, the same way as poverty. And that's why it's very difficult to break out of the poverty trap. And that's where the government needs to be deliberate, needs to be intentional in how it breaks the barriers and the chains of poverty by any means and all means necessary, to ensure that when we speak about women empowerment, when we speak about inclusivity, we have leveled the playing field. You cannot imagine that women go into STEM because you have not leveled the playing field, right? You cannot say women must become astronauts because you have not leveled the playing field. Women in their household still predominantly take care of the domestic responsibilities. The girl child, when she leaves school, after school, she must go home, wash dishes, do this, wash clothes, while the male counterpart, who is the son, is studying, doing mathematics. We also dissuade young women from doing STEM subjects because we're imagining that you can't be too educated for your husband. You can't be too educated for society. Those are the different areas that we need to dismantle. And of course, when you go into an even greater level, you were speaking about how we can ensure that there is an increased wave of cross-border trade for women. You know, we need to be able to be. I mean, Precious spoke about the woman bank, and she was speaking about stokvels. And because I've worked in the financial sector, you can imagine the day that banks agree that stokvels must be formalized into a woman bank, those banks will be near collapse. But it's also the same conversation that we're speaking about when we're speaking about government having its own state bank. Imagine if all salaries of government employees were paid from this one bank. God, you know, the future is quite bright. And we need to be intentional about it. And of course, you know, sometimes we're always cautioned that we must not be too antagonistic towards capital. But how do we imagine that a woman from Kwadruguza somewhere is going to be able to take her tomatoes there and take them all the way to Egypt, right? How do we imagine that happening if we're not deliberate about dismantling what capitalism and patriarchy has essentially done to women, which is to subjugate them economically, politically, socially, and otherwise, and trap them in peripheral areas where they know very well that their main preoccupation when they wake up in the morning is to think about, how am I going to feed my children? When am I going to clean this house? When am I going to tend to my husband? And never really imagine a world where there are CEOs of multinational corporations and they are trading between Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa. They are taking advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, amongst other progressive agreements that we have. We also have an agreement between South Africa and the European Union. There are many agreements that are there. BRICS, you can mention them. But because we have not created an enabling environment, it becomes almost difficult for women to imagine themselves tapping into these progressive industries, becoming astronauts, becoming captains of industry, and eventually becoming leaders of industrialization in South Africa. Thank you.
Sure. You said a mouthful. And I think the most important thing that I'd like to highlight is that most people, when we think about capitalism, we think about it only meeting it in the market, but the roots are actually deep. Because if we go deep into the education system, what we are taught, most of the times we are taught to become consumers, to become employable, but not to actually be initiators and to become entrepreneurs. So masiyika phezulu from the market, it's easier for us to fight something that's actually really deeply rooted. And I'd like for us to tackle that. But before we do, I think we have questions from people online. More to what? What is the role of women empowerment in the context? What is women empowerment in the context of revolution, where strategical competence is paramount as opposed to gender?
Nonsense. Oh, sorry. I thought I was muted.
You'll come in. Let me read this one. More to it. What is the role of women empowerment in the context of the revolution? It's the same question. You can come in, Comrade Karabo. And then I will take Dora this one before I open up again. Comrade Dora, do people understand the whole purpose of cooperatives? I'm asking because I work with cooperatives and family group themselves as a family to form a cooperatives, which for me doesn't solve the issue. So is education not enough to our people? So
should I go?
Yes,
and then
go.
We'll come to you, Comrade Prophet.
Go, Precious. This Benny. I saw when that question popped around. They've touched her in her studio.
These days, with growing up, we have learned an act of managing ourselves. So, what revolution? What revolution is that one that does not want to locate women empowerment in it? The struggle for gender equality or equity actually is the struggle for a classless society where people are not treated differently because of their class, their sex, their gender, their race, where everybody is treated equally. Now, to fight for gender equality or women empowerment is to fight for a just society. And I think for me, that is revolution. So there can never be any form of revolution which does not factor women empowerment. You know, as Karabo was busy explaining, and I appreciated what she was saying, because we must never overlook the plight of rural women, because doing that negatively impacts on development, because they are responsible for all productivity activities in the village. So empowering rural women, you make sure that you address cultural barriers and beliefs that exist, that are there, that have actually continuously socialized them to believe that they are inferior to their male counterparts, and to accept, you know, the norms that are there, that they exist to pleasure and to serve men. But beyond that, you speak about access also to technology now, where they've lost money is because of naughty kids who enter into their phones accounts and wipe their accounts without their knowledge and so on. Access to technology linked to the question of information, that you have to take it to them. You have to ensure that there's connectivity in rural areas. Expansion of broadband speaks also to their empowerment. And these are the most left out women that we have to ensure we bring them with. You speak about access to capital to start businesses. How do we ensure that they have access to capital to start businesses? But the other thing is also the government set asides that are there across all departments. Do these women know about them and how to access them? We need to take that to them. Access to land, whether we want them to farm, whether we want them to start businesses, land in the rural areas where Black people, by the way, own land, because the one that is arable and the one in the cities is owned by white monopolies. And the land that our people have access to, rural land, which is owned by our traditional leaders, is only given to men. So that land is passed from a grandfather to a father, to a brother, to a son. Women are sidelined in the ownership of that land. So they don't necessarily own land. On whose land do they farm? And under what conditions as subjects? So we have to make sure that women begin also to own land. I'm mentioning examples of the things that we got to address to build a society that is equal, that is just, that everyone is treated equally. And today, in South African context, that's a revolution. That's a non-sexist, prosperous South Africa is one where all these women that have been denied because of these issues that I mentioned have access, and there's redress to address the oppressions that they've gone through. So I don't know which revolution we are talking about, even if we are to speak the national democratic revolution that we believe we pursue, that we analyze as a movement every 5 years through our strategy and tactics. We do actually speak about social economic transformation to say, where are we where we transform the economy? But you cannot transform the economy without looking at what is the social distribution of this transformation that we talk about. So I would have, if the comrade is following, he must tell us which revolution he's talking about. Then we can take the conversation forward. But I like the interaction that is going on, so that we also take him to task for the things that he's saying. The policy shifts that are around are there. We've said we do have progressive policies that have been put in place, but how do we translate them to become the lived realities of these women on the ground, the unskilled women on the ground, the lower skilled women on the ground? There are women that are uneducated, and there are women that have crossed the level at which they could be educated. How do we ensure that we empower them according to their status to get these opportunities that we continuously talk about as we say we are transforming society holistically? So those are just some of the things that I would want to mention. And for women generally, including the ones in the city, limited access to property rights also. It's difficult to get credit. The interest rates are high to buy a house for women. We usually do not qualify. Very few qualify who are on a certain job market and level, or a particular profit bracket for businesses. So how do we ensure that we own houses? And it speaks, the interconnectedness is that it also speaks to gender-based violence, because if we stay in our own houses, no one can threaten us that they're going to kick us out, like Karabo mentioned earlier, to be on the streets, because we're in our houses. No one is going to say they're not going to buy food today because we have refused to sleep with them when we did not feel like, because we can afford to buy bread for our kids, we can afford to pay our fees. So the issue is actually about the economic emancipation of women. How do we elevate their lives, change them for the better, for them to be able to self-sustain and then make their confident choices in society? That is the crux that we have. We can theorize all we want, but as long as women are not empowered enough for them to be able to make decisions, then we will just talk and talk until we talk no more. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Comrade Precious. I know there was a second question for you, but in the interest of time, you can probably tackle it, the one on cooperatives.
Let me mention it in 30 seconds on the cooperatives. The intention of cooperatives is usually so that we unite communities and we have an opportunity that beneficiates like the entire community through this initiative that is put in place. Now, what people have done because of greed is that we start cooperatives and we lock them within families so that whatever proceeds that come out of that only remain within our families. It speaks also to the will of our people and also to the corruption that we have to address, that we must not allow such. We must allow where we have very wider cooperatives that have a more inclusive scheme, so that these people, when they benefit more households, more homes, and we're able to put food on the table. But if we allow the families to do cooperatives alone, it's more like having one person, because that wealth is going to remain and be locked within one family. So let's expand. It's an issue we can address with sensitization campaigns, and also ensuring those that are assisting them to register, those that are assisting them to apply for opportunities, advise them better on how to expand to benefit. We must take society with the soul of society, to take it with, to understand our intentions is very important. That they must understand, society must assist us to achieve the things we want to achieve. Because if we leave them behind, some are going to misjudge or misinterpret what we want to achieve out of the many good initiatives that are in place currently.
Thank you, Comrade Precious, for that. Karabo, I'm going to give you an opportunity to also respond and also provide closing remarks. But in your closing remarks, please take into account what you would give as an advice to all the listeners on what engagement, like on what work, empowerment work, that they can participate in to make sure that they also are responsible individuals and they contribute to the work of empowerment.
Thank you very much. I think I was taken by the spirit and I said nonsense to the comment. And I think I remembered that, we've got a responsibility to educate. We are not all on the same level in terms of whether it's political theory, political consciousness, and whatever engagement it is that we have, we must consistently remember that we all view society differently. And I suppose these platforms are platforms that we need to use to ensure that we educate one another. I mean, there was a point where the comment said, in this era, we must look at competence, and not necessarily that you look at gender equality or gender equity. And it's an anomaly, and it's quite degrading, as a woman, when a person says, but women are not competent. Which women are you talking about? I'm going to be graduating my second master's, an MSc in economic policy in the University of London in the UK. Comrade Precious here.
Your second international master's.
Absolutely. Comrade Precious here is going to be graduating with a BCom quite soon. I know you, President, you'd have graduated from WITS with an honors quite recently. So when we say we're dealing with the question of competence, what competence are we talking about? Because these are anomalies that are perpetuated in society, that women are not competent, right? We cannot speak about a 50-50 when we compromise quality. We don't want to sit here and evaluate the type of men that we have been subjected to, men that have collapsed this country, men that have actually led regression. We don't want to reflect about that. And we're not only speaking about those who are in political spaces, but even those who are in private sector. You look at the companies that would have collapsed PIC, male-led. People are faking their deaths here, saying that they've died because they don't want to be held accountable for actually plundering the resources of the state. People are running away, not being held accountable, fleeing the country. Half of these people that you see being reported for corruption, it's men. So when you speak about competence, who exactly are you speaking about? Because we are here. When you are looking for a woman who qualifies in this or that, if you can't find them, call us. We know them. We are those women. So we want to refuse any perpetuation that when we speak about women empowerment, we are saying that women are not competent, and in their incompetence, we want them to lead. But also, Precious would have said, we have a moral obligation as revolutionaries to understand what the revolution was about. When you sit and celebrate the women of 1956, what revolution is it that you are reflecting on? Why would have women taken a risk, carried children on their backs, and marched all the way to Union Building? what type of revolutionary are you that does not understand the historical context of South Africa, that you must come and tell us that no, women empowerment, competence. Sometimes we get overtaken by emotions because we've always seen this being perpetuated as a means to actually sidestep the question of empowerment in South Africa. But more often than not, when you speak about empowerment, people want to reduce it to this exercise that you want to push in women because they are women, and we're not going to be apologetic here. The same way black people, black men in particular, are being included because they are black men, is the same way that black women must be included because they are black women. When you speak about racial segregation, you are speaking about a type of system that segregated people because of their color, not anything else. Black people could not access Johannesburg as a city because they were black. So when you speak about black empowerment, we're not going to be apologetic. It has got nothing to do with us degrading any specific individual. We all have a right to participate effectively in the development trajectory of South Africa. And we want to say here and now that there is no woman that is not competent to lead the job, because you have not done any evaluation of the type of men that you have consistently given us, you have consistently produced. And we can say here without any fear of contradiction that if you put them here on this platform, we'll take them toe to toe, 10 knots, clear, solid. And it's not an issue of arrogance. It's because we all come through the same rank and file. We've been in the trenches with those male comrades. So it's not a question that we think we are better. No, they are our counterparts. But we will not tolerate anybody who wants to perpetuate a perspective that women are incompetent and therefore we just want to, promote them just because they are women. But yeah, no, in terms of empowerment initiatives, I mean, we can go on and on. Hey, man, you are reminding us of our times when we were still young. Comrade Precious, when we were still president of TUT, burning buses. No, I did not burn a bus, but yeah.
I also want to add to that, President. I want to add to what Karabo is saying.
Yes.
They don't replace patriarchy with matriarchy gang.
Yeah.
Are the same people who see nothing wrong with unequal pay, the gender pay gaps, because in their logic, they believe men are better. So for the work of equal value, women are paid less because men are more qualified or men are better. This is the gang. When it saw the superior logic that justifies for the pushing of gender equality, there is a patriarchal notion that is going on, and I don't sympathize with it. It's big in the gender spaces that says, let's not leave the boy child behind. It's so strong, this let's not leave the boy child behind wave. Firstly, you undermine the capacity of women. Women fight for themselves. You have nothing to raise against a formidable fight they have fought for themselves as motive forces of this equality. Now you come back to us. You are telling us that, no, we must not leave a boy child behind. Yeah, he's doing crime. We're even doing excuses for perpetrators of gender-based violence. He's doing crime because they feel ignored, they feel not wanted. Hey, attention is given on the girl child and whatnot. Why are we not saying the same thing about white people when we speak about affirmative action and BE? Why are we not saying, no, white people feel lonely in the country, white people feel ignored, so let's not leave white people behind? It's because we understand what affirmative action is. But when it comes to gender, the wave of boy child, this is so big in gender spaces. And me, I have always viewed it as an infiltration of the work that we are doing. That why is it actually counterposed with the work of empowering young women and girls? Because if there's work that must be done on the girl child, why is it counterposed in the work of women empowerment? And why is that raised in platforms of women empowerment if there's work that people want to do on the boy child and men? So these are just some of the things that perpetrators and proponents against the empowerment of women do and say. They reproduce their things in many ways. They reproduce whatever they believe in many ways, but the agenda here is to stop women empowerment and gender equality.
Sure. You said a mouthful. I saw Karabo clapping hands. In my head, I'm also screaming, you know? I totally agree with you. I totally agree. I even asked if there's a grace period where if now we've passed 7 in our time, what's the grace period? So they said 30 minutes, but I'm just going to extend it up until 7 because we are really burning. And I think this is the conversation that's needed. And if this is a bonus episode, we must give them bonus time as well so that they can continue to listen. So now, before we end the conversation, there's this discussion in terms of women leaders to say that when people are now employed, they are in the workspace, women leaders are not kind to other women counterparts in the workspace. How do we ensure that this is not the conversation? How do we ensure that the focus is that everyone is empowered holistically in all dimensions? And if this is a lie, we dispel it. I'll start with you, Karabo. I'm seeing facial expressions.
Yeah, no, you must see facial expressions because, you know, just the other day, there was a Facebook post that I shared. It was speaking about how women who find their husbands or boyfriends cheating will always attack the other woman and leave their husbands in the household. And that's because we've viewed women as weaker opponents. You know, it's always easy for you to go against a woman than it is for you to go against a man, because you'd have measured, whether you are measuring their strength, whether you are measuring their financial muscle, you are saying, hey, with a man, I must cheat a bit carefully, but with a woman, I can climb on top of her. And those are the sentiments that actually even are taken into the workspace. Women who complain that their bosses who are women do not treat them well are the very same women that do not respect those bosses. But also we don't exonerate women who are toxic, because there are women in the workspace who are also toxic. We don't exonerate them, but you hardly find women who come out and speak against their male counterparts, because there's this thing in us that, you know, men must be exonerated. There is pressure that is put on women, and it's a conversation that happens even on anything, even something as simple as women being emotional. Once you are emotional, it becomes a big thing. But men lose their temper all the time. They beat each other. You know, they become violent, but nobody says men are emotional. We have put so much pressure on women, both as workers, both as bosses, to be perfect human beings who are faultless. And the day they have faults, it is us that are the very first people to throw stones. And I think I want to say that having been an employer and having been a person who leads other young women, I have seen the different spaces, and I have seen how sometimes it is your subordinates who want to show you what they are made of, because they feel that, you know, this one will not tell me anything because you are a woman. They undermine you based on the fact that you are a woman. But you also know that there are women who can also be counter-revolutionary and actually oppress other young women. I suppose it's a call for us as women, as young women, to be able to ensure that we change how we view each other in society, even when we are in the workspaces, right? Do not see women as competition. Do not see them as your competitors. Sometimes we also trample on women because we want to impress men in the workspace. There are so many multidimensional issues that women are affected by, but also there are women who, you know, throughout the ranks, you know, they've been so oppressed that by the time they get to the top, they are so damaged that they do not know any other way to behave except to reciprocate that which has been fed into them. And I suppose it's the work that we need to do as we continue to speak about empowerment, as we continue to speak about how we ensure, you know, conducive environments for women to coexist. We then start to look into those things, because also being in a boardroom with other men and being the only woman means you do not have any form of solidarity in that space. And it makes you look as if you are aloof to other women and their struggles because you are perpetually surrounded by men, and you perpetually have to, rise to the occasion and fight because you carry the image of other women in those spaces. And I think that is a challenge that we need to, to give to ourselves as women, that as we rise, as we continue growing in our different spaces, let's be more kinder. It costs you nothing to be kind. It costs you absolutely nothing to be considerate with how you treat the next person. Whether you are the boss, whether you are the subordinate, how you treat the next person matters, because sometimes it assists in how you build your relationship in the workspace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Karabo. Comrade Precious?
So I think we need solidarity, firstly, among women. And solidarity among women is to want not to impose judgments that would ordinarily not impose on men. That conversation of women also being worst bosses and whatnot is very common. But with men, we don't want to really highlight how men firstly starts from when they're employing you. The question of sex for jobs, it's mostly men who do it. It's mostly men who do it. That there's even been dramatization where women say they got the job through the thigh. That's why there's been dramatization of Sirupimperekele and all those kind of things. Because it's when you give indeed that you will be considered. Women being violated like that. In the workplace, you find bosses are having personal relations now with almost every subordinate. And these women are pitted against each other because they are contesting for the attention of this guy who's their superior. We don't speak enough around those. But there's this thing, and I think it comes with, it characterizes how we fight for ourselves as women, that we're always placed on a pedestal. We are just always watched. And that's why we have to work 3 times harder and more. That we are watched. How do we relate with others? We are watched. How do we respond to issues that happen to us? There is not an interrogation around male bosses, but an interrogation around women bosses is there. So those are things that we should be sensitive about when we want to talk about them. But they do not in any way dispel any form of abuse that workers have suffered in the hands of their women bosses. And that's why we still insist on solidarity by women, and also intergenerational solidarity as a way of transferring experience, transferring lessons, transferring skill in the workplace also. So we got to look at that. But let's stop judging women so much over everything. You are a bad boss, you are a bad leader, you what. Like it's so much on women. And we must refuse to go through certain judgments that are put on us.
Sure. Thank you so much, comrades. I'm seeing the comments here. People are inspired. People are saying they've enjoyed the session. I saw Comrade Mamba Tabile was saying that you guys are spitting facts and I'm managing very well. So thank you so much for that. We've come to the end of our discussion. At least we managed to cover the base. We unpacked what empowerment is. We looked at the hidden layers of empowerment. We also looked at the systematic barriers and the solutions to that. We looked at the role of authentic leadership, and we looked at empowerment as a continuous journey. And we had a call to action on what people can do from their various spaces in all corners of the world, on what they can do to make sure that this is not only a conversation, but it's a transformative conversation, and it's a reflection of the daily lived experiences of women. So thank you so much for tuning in to all our viewers. Thank you for making the time. And to our guest speakers, you are amazing beings. Truly and indeed, I'll always be inspired. You walk the talk, you breathe, you live woman empowerment. Thank you.